You know, 2023 would just not be complete if I wasn't working on this thing. I mean, I know it's only March right now, but it would just not be complete this year if I did not do something to this. So, I intended to do this a lot earlier, but, when you work on these a lot for 5 or 6 straight months, you need about 3 or 4 months of a break before you come back to them. So, we're coming back awfully serious, putting a wiring harness in this. All the part numbers and everything will be down below that you will need. But yeah, this is getting a wiring harness, and there's some stuff I want to go over before we get to the action of taking things off and putting things on. So I'm going to go over all that. If you don't want to listen to me ramble for probably 10 to 15 minutes, that's completely understandable. There should be a timestamp somewhere, either in the description, in a pinned comment, or I'll throw it in here when I'm editing. And you can skip forward to that, and that should get you pretty close to the meat and potatoes of the whole video. So, yeah. So you can go ahead and skip forward now if you want. Okay, well, you had your chance. Now it's time to listen to me ramble. There are... Oh, the wind. Yeah, the wind's going to come up today, so I kind of need to hurry up. So I'm going to stand here and talk first. That's a good use of time. All right, so wiring harness. It's no more invasive a procedure than anything else on this pickup, really. I mean, it plugs in right back there. There's a wood shim and zip ties over the engine harness connector. And it should be pretty much the same procedure for any 250, 350, 4, and 550 Super Duty because, it's just the engine wiring harness. You will notice maybe that there's no EGR cooler or anything, so those won't be plugged in. Obviously, the truck's been deleted for a while. But to properly appreciate why myself in particular is putting a wiring harness on this truck, I'm going to go ahead and give you the whole backstory, not the entire one, but a pretty good backstory on some of the issues we've had with this. And that's going to take a minute, but I think these explanations are important so that you can understand where I'm coming from and the logic I'm using, so that maybe if your situation is similar, you can go along the same path. Maybe you'll come to a different conclusion. The diagnosing is always the hard part because it's very confusing when you have electrical issues. So we're going to start out with, well, let me think. How far back should I go here? Let's start with the back pressure sensor. This all starts with the back pressure sensor. Really, it starts before that. When we got this truck, it had emissions on it, okay? And we didn't get the emissions deleted in time, blew out the first set of turbos. All right, so we get the turbos fixed. They weren't replaced. I'm pretty sure they were just fixed. Truck's deleted. All right. It runs, I'm just going to say it runs for a while. And then we start getting issues with... I think first it was the manifold absolute pressure, the MAP sensor, which just sits over there. You'll see it later. We get issues with that, and this is before I really took an initiative to work on much of anything. I was still a little too young to be doing that. I had school and stuff, but the manifold absolute pressure sensor was an issue for a while. That was a problem, and then the back pressure sensor started being a problem. And what it would do was, when it was acting up, the turbos would rev really hard, like you'd get 20 to 30 pounds of boost, but the engine itself would not rev up. And so consequently, you had no power and you couldn't get up to speed. And it was just really irritating. We fought that for a couple of years until we figured out that if you came from the sensor itself, I mean, we got mad enough. And essentially, we came from the sensor itself, put a new pigtail on, of course, and a new sensor, and then came all the way back into here and spliced new wires on. That's the most popular video on this channel, and it's one of the oldest ones on this channel. So that is what that video is about. And since then, there have been a couple of problems. The back pressure sensor is not acting up anymore in that it's causing the turbos to be weird, and of course these are new turbos. But the back pressure sensor is not causing problems anymore like it was. It's not causing the truck to lag. It's not causing the turbos to overboost, anything like that. But what is weird, and I think I mentioned it in that back pressure sensor video, I've never been able to clear the code for that. And the check engine light has always shown up on the dash. Now, in traditional hillbilly fashion, we were like, well, it's running fine, so we're just going to ignore it. And it wasn't hurting anything, but I could go in there with the scanner and clear it, and it would not clear sometimes, and sometimes it would clear, but then it would just come right back. And it was always a voltage code. What is it, the P0472? Always a voltage code. And I was like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I wasn't worried about it. And as time went on, then we started getting some other issues after we replaced the turbochargers here. It went a few thousand miles, and then injectors started causing a couple problems. Number 7 injector was a bit of a problem. I did a video on that. Okay, injector's bad. That's not a big deal. I did put a couple injector wiring harnesses on. That didn't fix it, so I was like, okay, injector 7. Replaced it. Everything's fine. Then injector 3, which was also showing signs of going out. Okay, so I replace it. Well, that injector was a Delphi, and the O-rings they used are crap. So that O-ring disintegrated, and it was leaking fuel everywhere, so I sent it back, ordered a Motorcraft one, put it in. And I'm like, okay, I know for a fact that that's not a problem anymore, but it's still adding too much fuel. So what does that have to do with wiring? Well, the passenger side, which is where 1, 3, 5, and 7 injectors are at, it has a new injector wiring harness on it, and it's a Dorman harness. I mean, it was kind of the pricey one, and it's a lot nicer. Again, there's a video on all that somewhere. I don't expect you to go watch it. I have done a video on all that if you are curious. So that was kind of being irritating. I thought, well, that's weird. I'm also getting a mass airflow sensor, circuit high or voltage high code, which I thought, okay, that's a little weird, but it's been there for a while. Nothing out of the ordinary. Okay. In addition to that, that's still there, back pressure sensor. And now, here's what's really weird. We're getting all these like airbag codes and other stuff that pops up on the instrument cluster just randomly. Okay, well, that all screams electrical issues, right? Right. Well, here's the other problem. When I said that number 3 was still not working right, number 3 injector, it's adding too much fuel. It's adding like 10 to 20 points more fuel than any other injector. That's really, really weird. And a lot of people that have seen the injector videos have been saying, oh, you need to check compression, your piston's bad, your rings are shot, your engine's worn out, because there is quite a bit of blow-by, I'll grant you that. They're like, oh, you know, you got all these actual mechanical engine problems, and I don't think that that's it, because all the electrical problems I've just described to you, okay, and then on top of that, you start the pickup up, it starts fine in the cold. I can't, you know, that's important, all right? Sometimes when it's really cold, this thing will run fine until it gets hot. Sometimes it will run like crap until it gets hot, and then it'll run better. Sometimes this injector will cut out, sometimes it won't. Sometimes this sounds like a 6.0, sometimes it sounds like a 7.3. Sometimes it runs perfectly fine. Also, there's plenty of power still, okay? The oil is not being diluted. The oil is not disappearing at an abnormal rate, which means the piston is fine, which means the injector itself is fine. It's got to be wiring. That's what we have narrowed it down to, and that is the biggest reason why we're putting the harness on. Now, even if that's not the problem, the harness does kind of probably need to be replaced simply because this truck has 280,000 miles on it, and if you can look in there, you know, there's not really a lot of room for air to circulate over this. And so this thing gets hot, not to the point it's going to destroy the engine necessarily, but, you know, these are smaller wires. There's more of them. And as time goes on, the wiring, the quality of the wiring gets worse and worse. They don't use as much copper as they used to. They use more of a, I don't know if it's like a copper and zinc alloy or if it's copper and aluminum, but it's not as good a wire as was in the older vehicles. Even in my pickup, the 2001, the wiring is a lot better in it than it is in this 2009. So all of the issues, the random electrical problems, they just scream electrical issues, really, which not surprising. This is an international motor. They're not known for their quality wiring. That plus the injector problems, plus the lack of indicators that say the injector is faulting because of a mechanical issue, plus the fact that the pickup is old and the wiring harness probably could stand to be replaced anyway. It couldn't hurt. We went ahead and ordered one, and I'm going to put it on, and hopefully it will solve all of those problems. The only other thing that could go wrong if I put the harness on is another injector could go out, start going out, and that's to be expected. I've already accounted for that. We're ready for that. Everything else, though, it really is fine. It's giving us no indicator that it's any problem. So yeah. All right, so now that we've got all that out of the way, we'll get, pardon my shadow. Now we got all that out of the way, we'll go over how much you have to take off to get to the wiring harness, right? And it is strictly engine. I mean, you really don't have to do, there's nothing super fancy behind. There's just like one sensor behind that you can get to. So to get everything out of here that I'm going to need to have room, air cleaner, both battery boxes, which means the coolant's going to have to be drained because that battery box and the coolant reservoir are all one unit. Those have to come out. Probably the fan as well. I'm not sure. We'll just have to see. And I will also note, over the past week or so, couple weeks, my sense of time's a little off, but I've been talking to a guy. I don't know if he'd mind if I mentioned his YouTube name, not his real name. I don't know what that is, but I've been talking to him, and he said, oh, I'm having some wiring issues, is there any advice you can give me? And I was like, well, you can do this, but you could also replace the wiring harness. And he ended up doing it, and he said it was quite the job, but he got it done, and he ended up having to splice a sensor. I think he said the crank position sensor he had to splice because he couldn't get it off. He couldn't get the connector off the sensor, but he got the harness on. He said most of his problems were fixed. Electrical-wise, he was having an issue with a fuel pressure sensor, I think, but that's not related to the engine wiring harness itself. That's more the injector wiring harness and that sensor, and that sensor's underneath the passenger side valve cover, by the way. So yeah, all that stuff has to come off to get to the wiring harness, and then we're just going to peel it off, and I'll do my best to get in here and show you everything that I can. But, I've only got 2 hands, and I'm not super professional in my setup. I got a tripod, that's about it. So I'll get you guys in here as best I can to show you everything, and we'll just kind of go over it as we get it all off. All right, well, of course, step 1 is to pull the battery boxes, but we can't pull the driver's side one till we got some coolant out. I go ahead and got it draining there. It takes a little bit. You gotta be careful when you open that drain valve up, or you'll drop the whole thing, and you'll drop the little plastic knob out of there, and then you'll really start moving coolant out. If you want to do it that way, I suppose you can, but this is a little more less messy, I guess. Sorry, I'm thinking about other stuff. Anyway, what we can go ahead and do, though, is pull the passenger side battery box. And the driver's side is a little more advanced because you have that stupid coolant reservoir, and there's like a hose that curls around and connects to the water pump. It's a real nightmare to get out, and you're going to make a mess no matter how much coolant you drain. So we'll go over that a little bit later. But for now, we can go ahead and pull this one out. And there's just 1, 2, 3 bolts, plus a 4th one down there. But that one, see, that holds a bracket on, and the bracket's also attached to this fender. That is what your air cleaner attaches to. So pull the air cleaner. It's pretty simple. Just undo that clamp, yank this thing right out. You might go ahead and disconnect it from the turbocharger too if you want. That'd make it easier to get to stuff, but actually you better, because it's going to make it a lot easier to get to stuff. So we'll do that. 1 gallon of coolant down. 2.5. Well, no, it's not even a half. A couple more gallons to go. All right, so with the air cleaner out, you can really get in here and see a lot better. Your new harness comes with the plastic trays and everything that you're going to need, so you don't have to worry about that. But really, you take a couple things out of here, you can really see stuff a lot better. You shouldn't have to remove the oil fill. You will have to snake your hand back in there to undo the glow plug harness, and there's another connector all the way back. Get you past the... No, I can't get you past it. It's back in there, though. That goes to your exhaust temperature sensor. It's kind of back there, but, okay, you got where it plugs into your glow plug harness down there. You've got... This is your map sensor. This is your air intake temperature 2 sensor. I don't know where the first one is, but that's the second one right there, according to the book. These are all your EGR plugins. Of course, you got your fan clutch right there. Passenger side injector plug-in. It really, you know, it's not too bad once you start getting in here. And if you have any questions at all, if you're going to do this and there's something I didn't cover, there's something you don't know about, then you'll see it when you get in here. I mean, it becomes pretty obvious if you trace stuff. And it's only this side that is for the engine. So we are still draining coolant, and that takes a while. So I guess what I'll do is get some other stuff ready in the meantime, and then I'll just bring you guys back when it's time to pull the driver's side battery box, because that is a little bit of a challenge. All right, looking better all the time. We got this box out and everything. Your air conditioning hose is here. If you're careful, I mean, you can do it about like this. You can bend them over and then just take a strap, and you can hook it several places, but the big thing is you just want to hold this out of the way. That's going to help you tremendously. I believe that this cable right here is part of the new harness. And you've also got, that cable's not, but down there you've got your alternator plug-in, and then you've got the power that goes into your alternator. Make sure you save that little rubber piece if you can. That helps protect that terminal down there, and it'll make your alternator last longer. We have never had to put an alternator on this. Knock on wood. We've never had to put an alternator on this pickup. I did have to put a tensioner and stuff on though, except I didn't ever take any of this out. I essentially pulled this shroud here and stuck my hand down in that way. That was not fun at all. But yeah, once that's all out, you can really see stuff in here, and I'm going to go over it, but not right now, because I want to cover everything as I'm taking it off. So, when we come over here to the driver's side, I've drained enough coolant out. I think we're okay to go ahead and do this. But the problem, where's my, oh, I left it over there, my pointer. Hang on, I got another one here. All right, there's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, that hold this box in, okay? You have to disconnect this hose. Make sure your cables are clear, obviously. Now, the reason I said to drain the coolant is not just for this reservoir. It's also in case you have to disconnect this hose, or if for whatever reason there's a heater hose on that side, if you want to disconnect it. If you take 2.5 to 3 gallons of coolant out of the engine, that will afford you plenty of freedom to remove stuff without spilling antifreeze everywhere. The exception being this thing. You're going to spill antifreeze no matter how you pull it out, no matter how much you drain, because there's like little pockets down in here that when you start tipping this thing, you know, whichever way to get it out, and you have to, you're going to spill antifreeze. Accept it. Right down in there. I'm going to see if I can get the camera in. Focus. Focus. Right there. The thing I'm pointing at. See that? You can barely see it. There's a little metal clip. It's a C-clip. It's actually a smaller version of this, and that has to come off and then go back on. Getting it back on is the real fun part. You'll love that. But you have to get that off so you can disconnect that hose. Then you can pull this whole thing out, and then you can really see more hoses and wires on this side. But this should be the only other thing you got to take out on the driver's side. And then you can, let me think, what comes next? Probably, I'm going to go ahead and pull the shroud and the fan, but I don't know. I need to get in here and see a little bit better. But that hose down there, yeah, that's going to be real fun. You will love it. Now, if you want to be able to see in there easier, you can disconnect this here and pull it off. Oh, but here's the fun part, because Ford's so wonderful on how they designed all this. You got to loosen this and pull it up, except you have to loosen other stuff too, because if you pull up on it, you'll end up with that. But you can move this if you need to. But if you're a professional like myself that's had this out 89,000 million times, you don't have to. Now, you just sit there and watch as I end up having to do that. So I'm going to get this side out and see what else needs to be removed. Then we'll actually start getting down to counting the brass tacks. Yeah, see, I told you were going to spill coolant everywhere, and I did the same thing, so don't feel bad. And remember, I'm a professional. So now you can really see how much crap is in here, and you're probably not surprised to see, oh, look, there's more hoses and more wires. Woo! So This goes to your back pressure sensor right here. This goes back up into the main harness. This right here is for your actuator or your servo for the turbocharger. That's what tells your turbo to, turbocharge or not. And buried way down in there, I believe, is the crankshaft position sensor. It's pretty dirty. I'm probably gonna have to get in here with some compressed air and blow a lot of this gunk off, get it real clean. It looks like, to get to the driver's side fuel injection plug-in, which is back in there, you can't really see it too well. You can see kind of the top of it there. You may have to pull this charge air cooler pipe. That's not a big deal. That's gonna have to come off. And I'm just gonna go ahead and take the fan off too. I think that's gonna give me a lot better room to get in here and look at stuff and to show you guys stuff too. To pull this fan shroud. Okay, let me back up. Getting the fan off is a nightmare, all right? That is probably the worst thing you're going to have to do for this entire wiring harness replacement. I don't know for certain I have to remove the fan because, well, in case I didn't mention earlier, I've never replaced the wiring harness on one of these before, okay? But I feel qualified to tell you how to do it because I've had everything else out of here so many stinking times that I know how it all comes off, and the wiring harness is right there, and I can trace it, and it's not hard to do when you know what you're doing. So anyway, back to this. Getting the fan off is a pain. I haven't had any of this apart in a couple of years. For a while there, we were doing that quite a bit because this was going through serpentine belts, and we had to put an AC belt on, and oh boy, that was fun. But anyway, getting the shroud off is the first step to getting to the fan. So to get the shroud off without breaking it, you can get it off any way you want as long as you're willing to break it. But if you don't want to break it, then there's some things that have to come loose. Like these two bolts for the power steering, this bolt here, then you need to get these hoses popped off and kind of get them out of the way. Of course, it does help a little bit if you've got your battery boxes out already, but it's not necessary because this is the first time I've actually had the battery boxes out to pull the shroud. So do all those little bolts there. And then 1, 2, 3, take those out. And then 1, 2, 3, take those out. What that's going to do is let these cores flex back and forth a little bit. Is that going to be perfect? No, but it does help. You need to remove this bolt. There's a bolt that holds this on. This is the vacuum switcher box for your automatic hubs on the front. And if you break the vacuum lines or whatever, just plug them off and lock your damn hubs in. You're better off to lock your hubs in anyway. The vacuum hubs are not necessarily the best. It's dependent on so many things sealing like they're new. And when they get old and they don't seal very well, they don't work worth a crap. And it's just not a good time. So just lock your hubs in if you've got an older truck and you've got the original hubs on. So anyway, you want to do all that, you want to get that off, and it kind of like slides in here, so you pull that bolt out, you want to like take it and twist it out. You'll see what I mean. And then there is one more bolt that is supposed to be down in here. I don't know if you can see it or not. You can see the hole. I didn't put that back in. Now, yeah, those little bolts on the other side there, and then these 3 big bolts, these, and then the other one there. And that's going to allow all this to flex. And then, of course, unplug your fan from there. I feel like there's something else I'm forgetting that's supposed to come out. If I forget it, I'll tell you later. But when you get all that loose and get all that off, you should be able to pull it out without damaging it too much. This is already cracked in like, 8 or 9 different places. So I don't want to break it more, but I can't really break it more. It's already broken all the places it's going to be. I might refresh the dollar store chrome there. I might do that. I don't know. We'll have to see what it looks like when I get it out. And then when you put it back on, just in case I forget to tell you, don't crank these down too tight or you'll break them. You'll crack the plastic. I wonder if you can get new fan shrouds. I might look, and if I can find one, I'll put it in the description, and you guys can buy it and see if I'm right or not. I got everything loose, so now, theoretically, you should be able to, from down here, pull this whole thing out without much issue. It's going to want to stick a little bit, but it should go ahead and come out. what's that down there? Oh, I forgot to undo that. That's what I forgot. Okay. That's the plug-in for that four-wheel drive box. You'll need to move it and disconnect it, because I think that's what's holding me up here. Yep, that wasn't helping. Alright, there's one side. These vacuum lines I just disconnected. You don't have to unhook everything. But there you go. It all comes out. Looks a little different in there, doesn't it? Something fan-like is missing. That was a little bit of a problem to get out. When I said that was going to be the hardest part of this to do, I think I was absolutely correct. But it helps to have the right tools, and we will go over all of that. But for now, I want to point out something, okay, that you need to keep in mind here. This is the water pump, okay? Those are the threads, of course, that the fan clutch and the fan go on. Keep those bolts in mind right there, okay? Because they are not, well, just keep them in mind. They're kind of in the way of stuff, all right? Also, take note that this shroud is loose. I'll tell you how to get it loose here in a minute. But let's go over here to the fan clutch itself, all right? Keep these bolts in mind too. This is the nut, right? It's on the clutch. So, 1 7/8 wrench will do the job. This is a pretty beefy, it's an old Allied wrench, but as you can see, that is the correct size. Now, I said to keep in mind these bolts and those bolts that are on the water pump. When you use a wrench that is this thick, you can't get on the nut all the way because these bolts are in the way. The wrench isn't thin enough. So with this, all I was really doing was getting on it about like so. And when I would hit it to break it loose, it would just keep slipping off. So I went to town and I thought, well, I'll get me an 1 13/16 wrench, which this is not, because this nut is 1 7/8. I thought that was too loose, and that was part of the reason it was slipping off. That is not the case. It was too thick. I couldn't get it on all the way. So they didn't have an 1 13/16. They had an 1 7/8 though, and it's a lot thinner. And sure enough, it slides right down on there just fine. Hammer it a couple times, and it's backwards threaded, so you have to hit the wrench towards the driver's side of the vehicle. But you just get it on there like so. Take your hammer, strike that side, and go like that. Or you can hit the top of it here with your hammer and turn it at the same time. And that'll break it loose. And then once it's loose, you just spin the thing off and it drops. This is not light, it's kind of heavy. Also, don't forget to unplug this from the shroud before you start doing stuff. But there are a couple points I want to make here. First point is, it is 1 7/8, but you have to have a thin wrench to be able to get in there and break it loose. You don't need to take the serpentine belt off. You don't need a special pulley holding wrench, or strap wrench. I mean, you don't need one of those. You don't need to do any of that. You don't need an air hammer or an air chisel or none of that. All you need is a nice, thin 1 7/8 wrench. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting, because normally I would complain about the quality of tools going downhill. And it has. This is a $35 wrench. This was an auction wrench. I don't know how much it was, but it's obviously older. But this was like 35 bucks. Okay? Kind of pricey, but I needed it, and I imagine I won't use it on anything else ever. But I was prepared to grind this thing down. I did not want to grind this one down. And I would have had to get that clutch off. And so while the quality of tools has indeed gone downhill, look at that, it's even shorter. And as you can see, a lot thinner. But for once, the quality of tools going downhill has paid off in my favor. Now, Allied, as a brand, owns a whole bunch of other tool brands. They own like Crescent and Channel Lock. They're professional. Their high-grade line of tools is called Pro Grade. They are nice tools. Pro Grade are nice tools. And Allied is not a bad tool. But the reason I mention that is because it says Allied Pro, but their professional high-end line of tools is pro grade. This is just regular Allied. So the point I'm making here is these are both the same line. They're just different ages. This is made a lot cheaper. This may have been before pro grade came into existence. I don't know. But that's a much nicer wrench. And it doesn't get used on anything except that. But it never hurts to have wrenches on hand. So if you run into this problem, it is 1 7/8. You can get in there with something about this thin. I'm gonna say it's about 3/4 inch. That's what I want to say. I don't know, but you do need something thin to get in there because you don't have a lot of room between these bolts and the bolts on the water pump. You need something that's good enough to get in there and get a complete purchase on that nut, and then you can just hit it a few times with a hammer and it will break loose. That's how you get the fan clutch off. Now here's the hard. This is actually the more difficult part. Getting it out of the engine. We're going to crawl up here. My phone might switch to portrait or instead of landscape. I don't know. So here's a problem with this. Let's see if I can get you in there. Okay, right. Where's my finger at? Right there. See that? There's these corresponding pieces up here where up here it's studs. They go onto those studs on either side, but down below they're bolts, and there's 4 in total holding this shroud on. The way you have to do this to get the fan and the fan clutch out, remember I told you to loosen all this. You'll need to do that for sure, and then you'll need to take everything out, get this nice and loose, take it off the studs up here, and then shove it back out of the way, and that'll just barely give you enough room to lift that whole thing out. It is not easy. On this, it's not too bad because I got this cow catcher I can at least sit and stand on, but it is, it's not fun because that's heavy, and as you saw, that fan's kind of covered with oil and stuff. I think that's from when we tried to put 530 in this instead of 1540, and it just leaked everywhere. But with that fan out, you can take the shroud off, but you'd have to pop it loose of all the holders and pins and stuff down there because there's that cowling that runs along the bottom that you can kind of see. You'd have to get it off of all that in order to get all that out and really take this whole fan frame, shroud, shield, whatever the hell you want to call it. You'd have to take all that cowling off down there to get this all the way out, but you just need it loose for now. And then when you put it back in, it's a little easier. You drop it in. You get everything situated. You want your fan loose. Tighten this down, this frame thing, and then put your clutch on. Just spin it on. Well, you spin it that way to tighten it. And then the nice thing is about fan clutches, not every fan clutch is backwards threaded, but the way they're set up, the way they're threaded, as the engine runs and the fan gets resistance on it, it tightens it more and more on the water pump. So there's really no way for it to come off unless your engine's running backwards or you bought the wrong fan clutch. Those are really the only 2 scenarios in which that'll come off. If you threaded it on all the way and you could put your wrench on it for good measure and snug it up until it slips on the serpentine belt, and you should be fine. So, yeah, I was going to film that, and then when I realized I needed another wrench, I was like, no, I'm not going to bother. So, with that off, we can see right down in there. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. Yeah, you can kind of see it. Right there is another sensor that we would not have been able to get to if the fan had been on there. That, don't quote me on this, that looks like the camshaft position sensor. That, with the fan off, that should afford us access to everything in here. It's still going to be kind of tight, but with both battery boxes out, with the fan and the shroud out, we should be able to get in here and rip all this wiring out and drop the new stuff in. Now, before I pull the old harness, I'm going to come in here with compressed air and blast as much of this gunk off as I possibly can. Might come in here with brake cleaner too, just for good measure. But I'm going to get everything out of here that I possibly can so that it's as clean as I can get it, because I'm not replacing any sensors right now. So I don't want to get a bunch of dirt in there or anything. Before I forget, this is an outstanding time while your fan's out and everything to get in here and clean all these cores out for your radiator and all your other stuff, because you've got a ton of cooling cores up here and all they do is just eat dirt. One of the design flaws with not just this engine but this truck, the way they put it together, is that they did not afford you enough accessibility or ease of accessibility to get in here and really clean these. And if you live out in the dirt or the sand or whatever, you know, it's very important to keep this stuff clean. You've got your radiator, your condenser for your air conditioning, you've got your charge air cooler, you have your power steering, you've got your fuel cooler, you've got your transmission cooler, and there's something else I think I'm forgetting about. But there's at least, you know, 5 or 6 different things that are being cooled up here. And you've got to keep that stuff taken care of, because if you don't, well, your engine's going to run hot. That's going to wear out stuff faster. Your transmission's going to run hot. That is not something you want to screw with, is a hot transmission. You know, these Ford transmissions are usually very good, at least in their pickups, but you got to keep them cool, and you got to keep plenty of fluid in them. Power steering, you know, hey, if your power steering gets hot, it's not going to last very long. And if your stuff is not cooling well through your cores, your fan's going to kick in and it's going to try and pull more and more air in, and it's going to make the engine work harder and harder to keep that fan going. And it's dumb. Just keep your stuff clean. And I know it's difficult to do, but now is a good time to do it. And if it's the summertime, you can get in here with water and really get stuff cleaned out. But I wanted to show you, I was waiting for the air compressor to build up some more air. I'm going to show you how much dirt is in here. I've already blasted this out twice, but I imagine I do it again. There's still a good amount of dirt left in everything, because there's just no good way to get in here when everything's back together to clean all this stuff. So let's see how much dirt I can knock out of it. Okay, now that I've got everything cleaned off as good as I'm going to get, I think our first step is to get down in there. Let's see if I can show you. Right. Get the light in there just so. Let me sharpen the beam a little bit. That way I can really... Okay, so your crank position sensor is right down in there where those transmission lines are at. You can't see it very well like this, but I promise you it's down there. You can kind of see where that wire disappears, where there's that dark spot. It's in there. It looks like you can kind of get to it from underneath. I'm not sure. What I do know is that I can't have this coat on and stick my arm in there and get it off. So we're going to start pulling the whole harness off. We're going to start by pulling that connector off. Probably have to get in there some brake cleaner and get it real good and clean, because it is greasy. But we'll pull that off, and then we'll start getting everything on the driver's side disconnected. Most of the plug-ins and wires and crap are in the middle of the engine and on the passenger side, but these on the driver's side are the hardest to get to. So we're going to start peeling stuff off and get the whole harness out, and I'll just kind of bring you guys along as I start disconnecting other things. I can't have the camera rolling for that one down there. That much I know for certain. Oh my goodness. That is your crank position sensor. And my God, is that ever a pain in the ass to get out. It does sit down there, but here's a problem. The way it's plugged in is like this, so you got to push that tab down and then pull it off, okay? Well, it's on there. I'm just telling you that right now. And then this thing is shoved into the block. It's like a plastic stud they just shoved in a hole in the block, and that helps hold all the wires in place. So you have to crawl underneath and get all that out. I did pull the shroud support. It's over here. I didn't throw it. I just nudged it out of the way. It's got that on the bottom there. You'll have to kind of work out from underneath the rest of the cowling down in there. Anyway, yeah, the crank position sensor, absolute nightmare to get off, but I got it off. I kind of had to because I yanked on the wires so much I pulled the insulation off of it. So as you can probably, yeah, that was not going to work ever again. So I had no choice after a certain point to go ahead and, you know, pull it off. So next step, we'll go back here and disconnect the back pressure sensor. Pull that off, pull that up, pop that out, pull that off the stud. That's way longer wire than it's supposed to be, but that's okay. And we'll also pop it out of here, get that out. Then we'll come down here. On these, they've got these sliding red tabs. You have to slide them all the way back. Then you can push in on them on the little tab there and pull them apart. That's for your driver's side glow plug. Up here on the turbo actuator, there's supposed to be a little red locking tab that you have to pull out and then disconnect, but that broke off a while ago, so it's just held in there with faith. We'll disconnect that and maneuver it out through there. And now we'll just kind of come in here and, yeah, see, you can do all this one-handed once you get all this junk out of the way. Yeah, all right. Oh, but there's more. Don't you worry, ladies and gentlemen. There is more. All right, so this routes through there in like that tray, but we can, this conduit is us. I don't think that was Ford, but you can do all that. Let's see how much I can do one-handed before I have to get the tripod out. All right. Right here, I'm actually not sure how this comes off, but that's your oil pressure and maybe also your oil temp sensor. How does that come off? Like that. There you go. That's how that comes off. That's just held in there with faith. This is all your EGR. Sorry, this is all your EGR stuff right here, except for that. That's for your fan. But, okay, we got that loose. And then this tray will be loose. But we've got a couple more sensors. You've got that down there. I believe that's your cam position sensor. Or it could be your water temperature. But I don't think that's water temperature. Okay, there's a little clip on there that you get off, and then how is that? Oh, is there a locking tab underneath? Yes, there is. Looks like, anyway. Not sure how they've got that set up, to be honest with you. We'll come back to it later. You've got down in here, it's a round connector. It looks like that one right there. That's for your driver's side fuel injection harness. And I don't think I can get that. Yeah, I can't get that out of there just yet. I have to get this tray and all the wires and stuff out first. Have to get all that out of the way, and then I can get down in there, get it loose. The tray is not held on by anything except faith. You've got, let's see, right down there, that is a sensor. Not sure. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. I screwed up. Okay, this is your fuel. This is your fuel temperature sensor, because this is your fuel filter housing. This is your oil filter housing. A good way to tell what your oil sensor is, this must be a Ford thing, because on all the Fords I've seen, it's like this. Your oil pressure sensor has one wire. That's a good way to tell. And then, of course, over here, that's your mass airflow, air intake 2. Then there's your high pressure fuel pump, glow plugs, passenger fuel harness, which is under the valve cover, passenger glow plug harness, which should come off easy because I've had it apart enough. Yep, came right off. You've got your connections for your alternator down there. You've got that. If that's the cam position sensor, then where is the water temperature sensor? I don't know. There's your power steering pump right there. This tray is just, well, what did we zip? Did we zip tie to something in particular? Or, oh, I guess it is bolted on right there, isn't it? Let's just take that off, shall we? Let me get my extension. Just probably ought to keep that bolt. It's important. When we're putting this back together, it's gonna suck to get some of these plugged in without getting dirt and stuff in them, but you know, that's the way it is sometimes. All right, good way to not lose your hardware is to set it up here on this cowling. That way, it's not gonna get knocked off, most likely, and it's not gonna be in your way, and you won't lose it, and you'll be able to separate it out pretty easy. It's also a good place for all your tools. So now that that's off, what else do we have going on down here? They really don't make it easy to get to any of this, do they? Originally, these little trays have these snaps, and you're supposed to, I guess, pull down on them and pop them up. I don't know. It's kind of a stupid system. As you can see, we've zip tied it. You've got, oh, I see. You got another sensor back down that way. That must be your water temperature. That would make sense. So there it is. But for right now, oh my gosh, I can't do this one-handed, and there's no room for me to get in and show you much of anything else. So most of these connectors are different. There's really no way to screw them up. They only go in one way. If the connectors look similar, just put it in the engine, and you know, the wires will only stretch to really to one sensor. So it's kind of hard to screw it up. All right, here's the deal. We're going to talk about that in a second. Here's the deal. Everything has come off, other than that first sensor I mentioned that I thought was the crank position sensor. Now I'm not sure it is. Again, we'll get into that in just a second. But everything has come off pretty easy, okay? I got everything disconnected from the powertrain control module. I got all that off. Everything's good. So then there's this one wire that runs down. And that bracket I just showed you sits right here, and that is what both of your tensioners, yes, there's two, both of your tensioners, both of your idlers, and then your alternator, all attached to this bracket, and the bracket sits on there. And I couldn't see, because I had to go look at the new wiring harness. I got it out in the sun because I stupidly thought I'd have this done today. But looking at this, you've got, it's one wire and then it tees off. It's two separate wires. One wire plugs in to the compressor right there, okay? But here's the thing. Here's the cool thing. The second wire runs like back behind the compressor and plugs into what I believe is the actual crankshaft position sensor. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned that guy that I was talking to in the comments and said he'd replaced his wiring harness and that there was one sensor he could not get to. I believe this is the one he was talking about. And I don't blame him for not wanting to go in there and try and unplug it and stuff like that. But I'm going to. And the reason I'm going to is because I do not, and I will not splice this together and then worry that it's going to be a problem later. So I've been working on trying to take the compressor off. There's 3 bolts. I don't have to take the compressor all the way off. I can leave the lines connected. But I need to get those bolts out, or, you know, unscrewed enough that I can move the compressor out of the way. And that should give me just enough room, I hope, to get in there and unplug that and then plug the new one back in and then put all this back together. And I'm going to have another set of hands to help me get the AC belt on and the main serpentine belt on, because there's no way to do it otherwise. So that's what's been happening. Otherwise, I didn't know that ran down there to a bunch of important stuff. This is by far the hardest part of the project right here, is to get this off. We'll take a look at that bracket in just a second, but there's two tensioners, like I said. This is the main tensioner, and then you've got this other tensioner right here, and that is what tightens your AC belt. Where did I put that? The AC belt's right there. Serpentine belt's probably somewhere else. But that AC belt's kind of a pain to get on and off. It should be easier now that there's all this room in here. I mean, you'd think it'd be easier anyway, but I don't know. So this bracket, turn it around here, and we'll just kind of lay it down. There's the bracket. Of course, there's your alternator. Our alternator seems to be in good shape here. That's a good deal. Then you've got, 1, 2, 3, 4 accessory pulleys that mount on here. And then you've got like a couple studs, and you got a couple bolts. Fun time was had by all. I guess there's only 3 things that mount onto this cover, but there's a second idler that bolts on like right there. Right there. You have to take it off, and then that cover, I kid you not, will just barely clear that power steering pump. That is no joke. So this has been an absolute struggle. It's better that I didn't film it, because I'm pretty stinking mad, and there were a lot of profanities uttered that YouTube would have been none too happy about. I think the occasional one on a channel as small as mine is okay. They're not going to throw a fit, but I was getting a little carried away there. So I am done for today. My hand, it's starting to cramp. I can't hold the little wrench I need to get in and keep loosening that last bolt on the compressor. It's not fun. So I'm going to call it quits for today, get some stuff picked up, and I'll attack it again tomorrow and struggle with it some more and see what all happens.